Beloved, prayer lives do not collapse overnight. They fade quietly, slowly, and gradually. No one wakes up one day and decides, I will stop praying. It begins with small compromises, missed prayer times, delayed devotion, shortened moments with God, and distracted focus. One day without prayer becomes two. 2 days become a habit becomes a lifestyle. And slowly, intimacy with God is replaced by routine religion. What was once a desire becomes a duty. What was once fire becomes form. What was once relationship becomes ritual. The spirit becomes dull, sensitivity to God fades, and prayer begins to feel heavy instead of refreshing. Not because God has changed, but because connection has weakened. Beloved, this is how prayer lives die, not through rebellion, but through neglect. Not through hatred of God, but through distraction. Not through rejection of faith, but through loss of priority. When prayer loses its place, everything else takes its place. And before you know it, the altar is empty, not because God left, but because we stopped coming. Beloved, one of the greatest enemies of prayer is not sin, it is distraction. The devil does not always need to make people sinful, he only needs to make them busy. Life becomes full, schedules become tight, responsibilities increase, pressure rises, entertainment multiplies, noise becomes constant, and slowly, prayer is pushed to the edges of life. Phones replace prayer, social media replaces silence, entertainment replaces devotion, busyness replaces intimacy, work replaces worship, not because prayer is rejected, but because it is postponed. Beloved, whatever you feed grows. Whatever you neglect dies. If you feed the flesh grows. If you starve the spirit weakens. Spiritual discipline cannot survive in a distracted life. Prayer requires focus, separation, and intentionality. This is why Jesus often withdrew from crowds to pray. This is why he sought solitude. This is why he valued silence. Because intimacy with God requires withdrawal from noise. A distracted believer will always struggle to maintain a prayer life. Not because they don't love God, but because they have not learned to protect time with God. Beloved, prayer will never survive in leftovers. God must become a priority, not a convenience. Beloved, many prayer lives die not because people stop believing in God, but because they become discouraged with God. They prayed, they believed, they fasted, they trusted, they waited, and the answer did not come the way they expected. So disappointment entered the heart. Confusion followed, faith weakened, hope faded, people begin to question, does God hear me? Is prayer working? Am I doing something wrong? Why does God answer others and not me? Silence from heaven is often misunderstood as absence from God. But beloved, delay is not denial, and silence is not rejection. God's timing is not punishment, it is purpose. God's process is not cruelty, it is preparation. Yet when people do not understand God's seasons, they interpret waiting as abandonment. So they stop praying with faith. They pray less. They pray weaker prayers. They pray without expectation, until eventually, they stop praying at all. Not out of rebellion, but out of emotional exhaustion. Beloved, disappointment kills prayer when people expect instant results instead of eternal purpose. Prayer is not a vending machine, it is a relationship. Prayer is not a transaction, it is transformation. Prayer is not about speed, it is about surrender. Those who endure in prayer see God's power. Those who persist in prayer see God's glory. Those who remain in prayer see God's faithfulness. Beloved, one of the quiet killers of prayer is unrepented sin. Sin does not only affect behavior, it affects boldness before God. When sin enters, guilt follows. When guilt follows, shame grows. When shame grows, distance forms. And when distance forms, silence comes. People don't stop praying because they stop believing. They stop praying because they feel unworthy to approach God. They say, I'm not clean enough to pray. I'm not holy enough to pray. I'll pray when I fix myself. But that is deception. The very place you run from is the place you should run to. Sin makes people hide like Adam in the garden. Instead of running to God, they run away from God. Instead of repentance, they choose silence. Instead of confession, they choose distance. Beloved, guilt does not come from God, conviction does. Conviction pulls you to God. Guilt pushes you away from God. The enemy uses shame to disconnect believers from prayer, because he knows that a believer who stops praying has already been weakened spiritually. Prayer dies when people try to clean themselves before coming to God, instead of coming to God to be cleansed. God is not looking for perfection. He is looking for repentance, humility, and surrender. Beloved, prayer dies when hunger for God dies. You don't have to force someone who is hungry to eat. You don't have to beg a thirsty person to drink. Hunger creates pursuit. Desire creates discipline. Love creates consistency. When hunger for God fades, prayer becomes mechanical. It becomes dry. It becomes forced. It becomes empty words without passion. People still pray, but without fire. They still pray, but without desire. They still pray, but without expectancy. Prayer becomes routine, not relationship. Duty, not desire. Form, not fire. Beloved, spiritual hunger dies when the soul is fed with too many substitutes. Entertainment replaces encounter. Comfort replaces consecration. Pleasure replaces presence. Noise replaces nearness. When the soul is full of the world, it has no appetite for God. A full flesh creates a starving spirit. You cannot maintain hunger for God while feeding everything else more than Him. This is why fasting revives prayer, because it starves the flesh and awakens the spirit. This is why worship revives prayer, because it stirs desire for God's presence. This is why the word revives prayer, because it creates longing for intimacy with God. Beloved, hunger must be cultivated, not assumed. Beloved, prayer does not revive by emotion, it revives by decision. A dead prayer life will not come back because you feel bad about it. It will not come back because you heard a sermon. It will not come back because of guilt. It comes back through intentional rebuilding. Revival starts with repentance, not just from sin, but from neglect. Neglect of God's presence, neglect of intimacy, neglect of devotion. Then revival continues with discipline. Fixed prayer times, protected prayer space, consistent prayer habits, structured devotion. Beloved, fire does not fall on empty altars. Fire falls on rebuilt altars. You must rebuild your altar of prayer. Rebuild your altar of worship. Rebuild your altar of the word. Rebuild your altar of consecration. Revival also comes through obedience. Doing what God instructs, not what is convenient. Following His voice, not your feelings. And revival is sustained by consistency. Not intensity for a week. Not excitement for a month. But faithfulness over time. Small prayers daily are more powerful than big prayers occasionally. Beloved, a revived prayer life is not loud, it is faithful. Not dramatic, but disciplined. Not emotional, but consistent. Beloved, prayer is not a ritual, it is a relationship. It is not a performance, it is communion. It is not a routine, it is intimacy. Prayer dies when intimacy dies. Prayer lives when intimacy lives. God never desired prayers without hearts. Words without love, noise without connection, activity without affection. The fire of prayer is sustained by love for God. When intimacy returns, desire returns, hunger returns, consistency returns, passion returns, fire returns. Because prayer flows naturally from love, people don't struggle to talk to people they love. They don't struggle to spend time with those they desire. They don't struggle to be consistent with what they value. When God becomes priority again, prayer becomes natural again. Revival is not found in methods, it is found in meeting God again. Not chasing experiences, but cultivating relationship. Not emotional moments, but daily communion. Beloved, prayer lives do not die overnight. They fade slowly, they weaken quietly, they cool gradually. But revival also does not happen overnight, it begins with one decision. One decision to return, one decision to rebuild, one decision to reconnect, one decision to restore intimacy. God is not angry with you. He is not distant from you. He is not rejecting you. He is waiting, waiting for your return, waiting for your voice, waiting for your hunger, waiting for your surrender. The altar is still open. The throne of grace is still accessible. The Spirit is still calling. The invitation is still standing. Come back to prayer, not as a duty, but as devotion. Not as routine, but as relationship. Not as religion, but as intimacy. Let the fire return. Let the hunger return. Let the intimacy return. Let the prayer life live again.